Hello there and welcome to this course on Python Fundamentals for Marketing. My name is Valentine and I'll be your instructor. In this course, we are going to follow the following structure. So we'll get started learning about the goals of this course or workshop. That's the learning outcomes. Then after that, we'll talk about what are the Python fundamentals for marketing. Why do we tend to use Python when it comes to marketing generally? After that, we'll get into a practice session, which should take us about 60 minutes. The idea is that we're going to practice those fundamental concepts in relation to Python and marketing. And then after that, we should be in a position to implement them in sort of any sort of project that we might come across in relation to marketing. Then towards the very end, we're just going to talk about the next steps. So what's next after this particular course, after this workshop? So even just to mention, to give you just an overview of the approach that we are taking when it comes to delivery of these courses, this workshop is the first of many workshops in relation to Python fundamentals for marketing that one would expect to undertake. So this is an entry level or beginner workshop. So if you maybe have experience in Excel, worked with a bit of some other data analysis tool that might not involve coding, then this workshop will be the most appropriate. Then after that, our recommendation is usually now to move on to data wrangling, or if you're looking towards going into other spaces such as web development, you now get to learn about other basic tools that one would use within their line of work, say something like HTML, etc. That's if you're going towards the web development side. But if you're going towards the data analysis side or data science side, then data wrangling, that's being able to manipulate data using Python, would be the next recommendation that we would provide. The reason is because the concepts that you're going to be learning here will now be concepts that when you're undertaking that other course, you feel that you are able to understand concepts in relation to data manipulation or data wrangling much more easily, because you know what's happening within your code. Because generally you're going to be using some of the fundamental concepts. So let's get started. By the end of today, we expected to have achieved these learning outcomes. We should be able to understand the importance of learning Python for marketing purposes. We should be able to identify and explain the syntax of Python, so the way we write Python code. We should also be able to demonstrate proficiency in working with different data types, which are just classifications that we tend to give to data. Data comes in different forms, textual, numerical. So we tend to give it specific classifications, which we call data types. And these allow us to be able to perform manipulation afterwards, maybe mathematical operations on that data afterwards. So we should be able to work with data types as well as variables. We should also be able to apply control structures. So control structures are just concepts that we use to make decisions within our code. Maybe if you wanted to check for whether our data contains maybe a certain piece of sub-data, then we use control structures. We should also be able to use what are called loops to iterate through or to go through the data that we have. And lastly, we should be able to use custom functions and built-in modules, which are just ways, custom functions generally are just ways of organizing code that we would want, while built-in modules are more of organized code that has already been organized by other experts. Could be data scientists, it could be software engineers, and they would in turn share it to with the community, so that one can be able to work on their projects with ease instead of writing, let's say, code from scratch. You use what are called built-in modules. So those are the learning outcomes. By the end of this learning experience, you should feel like, if you come back to these learning outcomes, that you have been able to have achieved them. So Starting off, what is Python fundamentals for marketing? This just refers to the basic principles, basic concepts or techniques in relation to Python or the Python programming language that would come in handy whenever we are working on marketing related tasks or activities or generally projects. So these fundamental concepts in relation to this programming language are what we call Python fundamentals for marketing. We are not really talking about complex concepts such as maybe machine learning for marketing, or concepts or something like data visualization concepts. We are focused on just Python, the language itself. The first thing that you get to learn about Python before you then specialize in one area, whether that's data visualization or machine learning or data analysis. And these fundamental concepts include variables and data types, printing and comments, arithmetic operators, f-strings, if statements, loops, lists, dictionary sets, functions, and modules. There are further advanced fundamentals, but these are the most basic ones that would come in handy in your learning journey. In any sort of project, I would think that you are going to implement almost more than half of the mentioned concepts that we have. But again, sometimes we might want to go further and get to maybe create solutions that do not necessarily only use these fundamentals, but that's okay. At least for now, you will have acquired some skill that would be important that you can later onwards use whenever you are specializing in a certain area when it comes to using Python. Maybe even web scraping, how to collect data from maybe websites and use it for marketing purposes. That's also something else. Roles in terms of the different experts that tend to work with Python in relation to marketing are data analysts, there are digital marketers, there's marketing researchers, there are marketing operations managers, as well as marketing data scientists. And these professionals tend to work on projects that vary. They could work on projects that involve analyzing customer data or analyzing just generally market data that they have gotten, or survey data that they have collected from just various stakeholders or focus groups. And they would in turn first of all, import that data maybe to an environment that allows them to be able to do the analysis. After that, they would explore that data. They would then ensure that the data is clean. They would then later onwards visualize the data or do some analysis on that data. In some instances, they could also decide to create machine learning models to predict certain marketing trends, and as a result be able to make some sort of informed decision that that goes into their advantage. So these are just some of the roles. There are many roles that generally many roles that one would expect where Python fundamentals for marketing would be implemented. In terms of deliverables, still pertaining to those roles, the various experts might end up working on data analysis reports. So just looking at having initially defined a research problem to solve, and then being able to produce a report based on data that they have collected that answers that particular research question. They might as well also create data visualizations such as charts, or even interactive visualizations such as dashboards to illustrate maybe findings or trends, not only to themselves but also to other stakeholders within an organization. They might also decide to use Python to write what are called scripts to automate marketing campaigns, such as probably email marketing. So if, for instance, they would want to automate maybe campaigns that would be sent at a particular point then they could go under the hood of the application that they're working with and create the desired functionality. Social media posting is also a part of automated campaigns where one would be able to develop a product possibly that sends posts every specified time, or even better, send posts relative to the engagement time of the current users. If they realize that a majority or a few or this particular users tend to view their social media apps at this time, then they could be able to post those campaigns during that time, etc. Other deliverables might be web scraping scripts, which are scripts, by the way. It's just a collection of code, a Python code. They could write a collection, or they could write just Python code. When it comes to working with programming languages, we tend to write code. And programming languages, by the way, are just those programs that we can use to write other programs. So there's Python, which is specifically usually used for data analysis and even web development work, or even desktop applications. And there are other languages which are specifically for other purposes, maybe such as maybe PHP, which is just focused on web development work. But web scraping scripts would just be code that collects data from just various websites. It could be from job opportunity sites and curates that data and gives an output that stakeholders can use, maybe for to understand customer reviews or competitor pricing, etc. They might also want to build predictive models to forecast maybe customer behavior or campaign outcomes, or even understand marketing trends. Lastly, have also presentations that they could present that are well informed through just analysis that they have done using Python. Yes, those analysts might end up using maybe basic tools like Excel, but essentially when it comes to working with Python, it gives you a way of just going much more deeper into your analysis than just maybe using just a tool like a basic tool like Excel. I think I've already talked about a bit of also why learn Python fundamentals. I mean, you're able, as a marketing expert, you're able to analyze data sets, that's large data sets, efficiently. You're also able to automate repetitive tasks. You are able to use predictive modeling and automation techniques to stay ahead of competitors. You're able to also collaborate more effectively with other stakeholders who are also versed in Python, and also do a lot of data analysis work, such as data analysts, data scientists, or even software developers. And also you can be able to segment customers maybe based on behavior, preferences, and be able to now deliver targeted content or even just offers to that audience that you're looking towards. All right, so now that we have gotten a good feel of what a good feel of Python fundamentals for marketing, so we have just a good theoretical understanding. The next thing that we are going to do is to go into the practice aspect. We are going to work on these same concepts, but now get to practice them using the Python programming language. So the next thing that you're going to do is to visit the link that we have shared in the video description of where we've shared this particular stream. So at the video description, you should see a resource link. Click on that link, and it should redirect you to this page that you're seeing on your screen. Once you get here, you should click on the sample practice resource link at the top. That should direct you to what you would see as this. So this is the document that we are going to be using to do our analysis. If you're an Afterwork member, you could always log into your account and have access to the practice work. Still, the only difference between this is the sample. This sample only has just challenges, like half of the content, just a bit, almost half of the content. It doesn't have practice for the entire content. And also the sample notebook does not have solutions. So if you are an Afterwork member, you can log in and you will be able to get access to the practice resource. That's a practice notebook, as well as the solution notebook that will have all the challenges, as well as just sample solutions to the different challenges that you're going to get. So these are just exercises that you will get to work on. So starting off, once you have gotten to this notebook, a notebook generally, for those who are new, is just a document that we use as data analysts or data scientists to share work with other stakeholders, maybe other data scientists or data analysts. And in a notebook, you normally have what are called cells, which are just sections within your notebook. There are two types of cells. There's a code cell. That's where you can put your code and run it. So that's where we're going to be putting our programming Python code and be able to run it from there. And there are text cells that just simply contain just text. They can contain other forms of media, maybe photos or links to videos. And you can also contain text cells inside text cells, which we have in our case. Like, for example, we have different sections, and the different sections have different sections. They have other text cells inside other text cells. So the first thing that we need to do is to create a copy in Drive. I'll just use the practice notebook instead for this purpose. Actually, I can use just the sample notebook. So, but if you're an Afterwork member, just use the practice notebook. Don't use the sample one. It's still the same, only that you have just more challenges. Starting off, the first thing that you need to do in this notebook is save a copy of this notebook to your Google Drive so that you're able to make changes. So go File, then save a copy in Drive, and you should be able to make changes to your notebook. So, so once you say close down this browser, you would be in a position to access that particular notebook later onwards. So let's do that. So go to File, then save a copy in Drive. It should open a new tab of this particular document, and use that. You can close the original one, the one that I'm opening. If you use the original one, you won't be able to save the changes that you're going to be making, your work, just in case you want to come back and work on it in the future, on that work in the future. All right, so once you have done that, the next thing that we need to do, let me just open mine in playground mode. I don't want to save changes, so contrary to what I've recommended. So I don't want to make any changes. So once we have done that, you click on connect. There's an icon at the very top right. Just click on connect. It should now connect our notebook to Google servers, which are going to run our Python code, the code that we're going to be running. We can decide to run our code locally, but we need some extra software for that. And sometimes the installation process can be a bit tedious. You can get errors, which isn't the focus of this course. So once it has connected, you should see a check, and now we're good to go. We'll start learning about now the Python syntax, learn about data types and variables and data types. So starting off, a variable is a container. So when you're working with Python, we would normally work with some data. Data can come in different forms. It can come in text. It can come in the form of numbers. But in numbers, we have other sub-data types. So just think of this as, when it comes to working with data, we give the data that we're working with different classifications. The first is usually what is called just text, but now in Python we call it string. So any piece of text that we want to work with in Python, we give it a string classification, string. For numbers, there are what are called integers, which don't have decimal points, and there are also what are called floats, which have decimal points. So those are three different data types. I've talked about string, integers, and I've also talked about float. The fourth one that would come in handy is a Boolean. Boolean is a data type that can contain two values. That's true or false, as you can see here, true or false. So starting off, again, when we have a piece of data, we normally would want to store it temporarily somewhere so that we can be able to call that container that contains that piece of data. So we might want to store maybe the string Python programming book in a variable, which is a container. So that container, that place where we store our variable, our value, that's the string, is called a variable. And variables, they are different. You can think of them as when we create a variable, the computer normally would allocate some memory in your computer memory, and it would allocate some space, and that space would be only for that value. So in our case, we would want to create a variable to contain this piece of text, and the variable is called product name. And to assign this string to this variable, we usually use the equals operator and your equal sign. So and on the left hand side, so we have the variable name. On the right hand side, we have the value. So in our case, we are going to create or define a variable product name, and normally, conventionally, it's a good practice to just rename or name them in small letters. So product name, then we assign this value. So by how we say it in programming, it's that we are assigning the value on the right to this variable. So we're assigning the value Python programming book to the variable product name. The same case, we are assigning the value 25 to the variable price. The same case here, we're assigning the value true to the is on sale variable. Variables cannot have space in between. That's why we also having underscores, so that it can be easier to read as well. And also variables cannot start with special characters like hashtag, star. They are conventions, so it's best practice just to start with lowercase letters and work with that. So once we have created, now we have created 3 variables. They contain different pieces of information. Now, to be able to reveal what's in those variables, we can use what is called a print statement. So here we have a print state or a print function. A function had mentioned earlier. It's just a way of organizing code. So we can use this print function, which behind the scenes has some code that outputs whatever that we want. So a function is just you can think of it as a block of code that if you give it an input, it gives you an output. So if in our case here we have the print function, if we give it an input, actually here we are giving it 2 inputs. We are giving it this input, which is a string, then comma, giving it this other variable name, which is here. So product name, then the variable name. So the print function here, it takes 2 values and then it prints them out. It shows what exactly is, has been given. The same case, we are doing it with the price and also is on sale. But again, you can even decide just to give it one piece of information. That's just product name. Yeah, so let's run this. If you get this notebook pop up, just know that you haven't saved your copy of the notebook in Drive, and you can do that. Also, if you still haven't understood what I've talked about, feel free to rewind the video. That's the beauty about streaming. You can always just rewind, pause, and learn at your own pace, as opposed to maybe a meeting room where one can go really fast and you can be left behind. So yeah, and also you can also ask questions in the comment section, etc. if you have. All right, so we have printed, we have 3 print we can call them statements, but 3 print functions. And the output of these 3 usually comes in this section called a console. So we have the first output, product name, Python programming book, product price, price is 25, which is here, and his sale is true. So that's how we can be able to work with variables, data types, as well as print out the values of variables. All right, the next thing you're going to do is to create, to work on this challenge. Just work on this challenge, just read through, and then use the knowledge that you have gotten here of those 3 concepts. Data types, you have had about variables, you've had about how to print use those to be able to work on this particular challenge. You can pause the video, work on it, and then we'll continue afterwards. If you're an Afterwork member, remember, you could always just go to the sample solution, the solution notebook, and you'll get the answer. So the answer for that, you can even just click on it, is this. All right, moving on. Print statements, it's actually what we have already talked about, being able to print and display an output on the console. So we use just the print function and we give it some input and it gives us an output. So that's what we do here. That's yeah, so that's it. By the way, you can, if you still feel like we are too fast, you can always just read the text that we've provided and also some explanation for that. All right, work on the challenge, pause the video. Once you're done, we can continue. F-strings. So F-strings are more like, you know, they achieve almost the same thing. They are a way of just printing out what we have here, only that if we want to have variables in between our strings. So for example, here we had product name, then comma, then product name at the end. If we wanted to have product name in between here, like somewhere in between product and name, then what we can be able to do is use what is called an F-string. So an F-string would allow us to be able to define where exactly in our string we would want to embed our variables. So for example, here we use the print statement or print function. By the way, a function usually has the name of the function, which is a print, and then you have the parentheses to define what's the input. So here the input is actually what is up to here, whatever that's contained between the left parentheses and the right parentheses. And the input is an F string, so F, then into quotes, the string, so we define the string into quotes, both sides. Then we put the string, and then inside the string, we first of all define where we want to embed our variable product, which we wanted to come here. Then we also want to do the same with discount, but we also want to multiply it by 100. So we can do it by 100. And then we can put a percentage sign just right after when we define is the variable inside an F string, we call that an expression. So that's what we are doing here. We're also having an expression, and an expression can also be a calculation that you can see as well as over here. And we can also still inside that expression say that we also want to we can also format our values, if that's a value, the value of that particular variable. So .2f just means we want to format it to 2 decimal places. So that's what we do, .2f. Yeah, and also some other concept that we have introduced here is that we have also introduced this mathematical operation where we say price times, star is just times, then into parentheses 1 minus the discount, which will be the final price, and that's what we print out here. So that's just for just what we are going to be covering next. But just note, F-strings allow us to embed what are called expressions within the strings that we want to print, which is much more flexible than having something like what we had here. If we had something like that, we would have to put a comma, then we put, you know, another string, comma, etc., which is a long way, but F-strings make it easier. All right. Work on the challenge, and once you're done with the challenge, you can unpause the video. You can pause the video now. Sometimes we might want to perform basic arithmetic operations, and this operation might allow us to just manipulate numerical values, and we might want to apply either use either addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division operators. These are just different symbols that we can use to perform just the calculations. So in our case, we can define, let's say, first of all, we define the variables that will contain the data that we want. And then we can use we can perform this particular mathematical operation where we say the variable conversion rate, we want it to equal to the outcome of this particular a mathematical operation. That's what's happening on the right side. So conversions, divide by, this is the division operator, clicks, times 100, which will be now conversion rate, and that's what we print out using just a print statement. That's basically it, and you can apply just whatever. You can do what you can do, deal with whatever. Maybe you have a bigger problem, not only this one that uses a different formula, then you can always use the same approach. All right, work on the challenge, and when you're done, you can continue. Data types, again, we will touch on a bit of data types, and then later onwards, we actually also going to introduce a few more data types that will come in hand in our line of work. So I'm working with strings. Sometimes, yes, we have strings, which we have been able to understand. They are just pieces of information that we enclose them in quotes. They could be even double or single quotes, doesn't really matter. And once you have done that, we could decide to combine those strings, and we can combine them by using an addition operation. But you cannot combine a string and an integer. You have to convert the integer into a string by having double quotes at the end, or using another method which you'll get to learn, which is called type conversion. But yeah, so this is our first string, get your plus, then product name, that's the variable over here, and which contains a string, plus for only, plus price, which will now, the outcome of this will be saved inside marketing message, and we can be able to print that out. All right, work on the challenge, and when you're done, you can continue to the next section. Just remember to pause the video. All right, moving on, numeric data types. Numeric data types in Python are those data types that we've talked about. We've talked about integers, we've talked about float point numbers, which are generally numbers with decimals. There's also another one called complex numbers, which usually have real and imaginary parts. Those are things that we learned back in high school. We won't be applying them, but it's just good to know that there are those data types. So here we have an integer, here we have a float, and so something to note is that anytime that you multiply or add an integer plus a float, or an integer times a float, you always get a float in the end, like you get a decimal point number. So that is something to note. As you can see, yes, it's technically meant to give you an integer, but the outcome is usually a float because it has a decimal at the end. You can work on the challenge, and once you're done, we can continue to now type conversion, which is what I was talking about a bit earlier. And type conversion just refers to converting one data type to another. So we might want maybe to convert this particular data type into an integer, which will give us 50, or this into a float, which we can be able to do that. And we use functions specifically for that. So for example, we might want to convert this string 500 into an integer. So we use an int. And then inside that int function is an input. We give it now this variable. We can even just give it the string directly, and the outcome of this that you see here, we store it in sales int and print that out. The same case here, if we want to convert this into a string, we can do the same thing. We convert the value that we have stored that in, and we convert it into a string, and you can be able to perform now concatenation. By the way, in our case, when we combine two strings, when we are combining two strings in programming, we don't say combining two strings, we say we concatenate. So we concatenate those two strings, and voila, we'll get two strings. So here we will get 500, which is that's the first print statement. The second one, we get what we have here. All right, work on the challenge, and then once you're done, you can continue to the next section. Lists. So lists in Python generally are a collection of items. So let me even just explain it in an easier way. So we have variables, but variables only store one piece of information. So this is a variable, it has just one piece of information. This is another one. But sometimes you might want to store multiple pieces of information. Like let's say we want to store cars that are related to it, maybe just cars, maybe Lamborghini, a Porsche or I don't know, some other car, but we want to store those, assuming we want to store those two values within one variable, then we can use what is called a list. A list allows us to store multiple items within one variable. So for example, we have Alice, Bob, Charlie, David, but all of that is stored within the customer names variable. So to define a list, we usually have a square brackets on the end. So opening square bracket and a closing square bracket. And then inside we define the items or elements. So the pieces of information or data that we want to store, we would refer to them when we're working with lists as elements or items. So we define what we want. We want Alice, which is a string, comma. We separate that with the next data, etc., etc., and we store that in this list. And then we can retrieve the item inside that list using what are called indices or position. So each item in the list has a position. And the position usually starts from position 0 in a list. So Alice has position 0, Bob 1, Charlie 2, David 3. So to be able to access, let's say, Alice, we would say reference the customer names, the name of the list, and then square brackets. Then we set what we have inside that square bracket to 0, and that's how we are able to refer to that particular case. So first customer here, Alice. We can do the same thing, and to Bob, Charlie, and David. But if you want to update, maybe change what you have here, we can still use the same method. So on the left-hand side, we say customer names, which is Bob, position 1. We want to replace it with this value, Eve. And then we can print that out. If we want to delete the last customer name, we want to delete this one, we can just use what is called the pop function, as you can see here, which will actually, this will actually get the deleted value and save it here. And we can be able to see it here. Then we can just print out the remaining values as shown. All right. For now, if you're not an Afterwork member, you won't be able to go through the challenges. But if you are, then you can be able to see the challenges for lists, which you should be able to see. I believe there is, yes, there's a challenge there. You can pause the video, work on the challenge, and then we can continue. Dictionaries are more like lists. So dictionaries are, dictionaries will still allow you to store multiple items within, say, one variable. But the only thing is that dictionaries introduce another dimension. They allow you to store more information within that particular collection that you have. Let's say, for example, marketing data is our dictionary name. Then we define a dictionary using curly braces, as you can see here, not square brackets. Then inside the curly brace, we store our information in the format of key and value. Like this is the first element, the first item is this key value pair. So we have campaign name, then summer sale is the value. The second key value pair is start date, and the value that is that, etc. So you can store as many key values as possible. And you can also have a dictionary inside a dictionary. Like this can also have you can have another dictionary in place of summer sale. You have multiple campaign names, etc. So it can be as complex as you'd want. So that just allows for flexibility that a list does not provide. But you can also still have a list that contains multiple dictionaries if the information that you have is complex. So that's what we do. We create marketing data dictionary, and to be able to preview now the campaign name, let's say for the first one, we can be able to use marketing data. Then we define the key. We put a square bracket, then we define the key to be able to print out the value that we want. If we want to replace maybe some sort of value, maybe for budget, we just define marketing data. Then we define the key, and then we replace with now this new value. That's what we're going to be updating. If you wanted to delete maybe the end date key value, this is how we do it. Delete, we use DL. then marketing data, we specify the key and we're able to delete that. So run that and just try to understand what's happening, play around with it, and you can also just go through the explanations that we've provided as well. You can pause the video, work on the challenge, and then we'll continue. Control structures. So sometimes you might want to check for whether a value within a variable, a list, or a dictionary equals to something or just satisfies some sort of condition that we have. So maybe website traffic, or which is the variable name, is it greater than 100? If it is, then perform an action. So we tend to use what are called if statements for such purposes, for such tasks. And in an if statement, you normally have the if keyword, the expression that we have here. Then we, after the expression, we put a double colon, and then we have a body statement, which is if this expression turns out to be true, then we'll execute the code that actually appears here. And it can be multiple lines, but they have to be indented. So on your computer, you have to indent it by just adding tabs. You can put double tabs, which works, and you can have code that you want to execute if this is true. If it's not true, then we go to the next expression. This is else. We print out what's going to be here. So here we have two if statements. So we have this one and also this other one. This other one just provides just a complex expression, and then we're able to print out the respective body statements. For if statements, you need to ensure that your indentation is okay, or else you'll get an error. Okay. Nested if. So here we have just if statements initially. So sometimes you might want to have an if statement inside, another if statement inside. So if this turns out to be true, then we can also have another if statement, so that we can be able to test for multiple conditions. That's where nested ifs come in. So we can have our initial data sets, the variables, then if campaign cost is less than 1,000, then we check again. If return of investment is greater than 500, then we do the same thing. So nested if just allow us to be able to perform multiple, to have multiple conditions within an if statement. And alternatively, we might want to do something else. We might want to use what are called else, if statements. So instead of doing a nested if, we might want to put, we might want to also evaluate another expression. So instead of going directly to the else keyword, so we say if this turns out to be true, this particular expression turns out to be true, this is executed. Else, we check now again this next statement, this next expression. If it does, this is printed. If it doesn't, then we move on to the other one. So we can have even multiple if, but you have sometimes to just think about the logic clearly before arriving at what you need to write. Let's run that. And when that is done, you can pause the video. The same case in the previous one, you could have paused the video, and then we'll continue. All right, for loops. So when we want to go through, say, for example, a list or a dictionary, we want maybe to retrieve an element in this dictionary, or even just do something with the information that we have here or in here. We normally use this concept of loops, and the first, the most popular concept is usually the for loop. So a for loop is a way that allows us, a concept that allows us to iterate over or go through a list or a sequence of elements. So for example, we want to go through social media, email, this list over here, and print it out with this message. So we tend to use a for loop, and we start by defining the for keyword. Then we define a variable that will contain the current value within our iteration. So if we start looping through or going through this list, during the first iteration or the first instance of going through the list, this value will be stored in this variable. The same case if we go to the second time, this value, the second iteration, this value will be stored in this variable, so it will replace social media. The same case here. So for each iteration in our marketing channels, we're able to store the value in the channel variable. And then inside a for loop, just like an if statement, there's a for loop body. By the way, I've forgotten to mention that in helps us to define whatever that we want to iterate through, so which is marketing channel. So once that is done, we put a double colon. We then have to indent to define the body, which is just an indent or two from the same level as was the for keyword. And what we want to happen, the code that we want to execute usually goes inside the body. For us, we just want to print out, this particular string, marketing on channel, which will be the current value of channel during an iteration, is essential for reaching out a target audience. So here we will get 4 iterations or 4 print statements because we have 4 different items in our list. So we'll have 4 strings, as you can see. If you haven't understood, you can always pause the video and go through that. For loops are just the easiest way, and they just help us to just go through entire lists from the beginning. But there's a slightly complex loop. There's for loops and while loops. While loops, on the other hand, only loops through a collection or a list if a certain condition is true. So we normally use a while loop. So we say a while loop, then we set out the condition that we want. So while email sent, we have this variable that we decided to start. If email sent is less than the length of the customer list, len is just a function that gives us the number of items, how long an item is, like in our case, number of items in customer list. It will give us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if email sent is less than 5, then we are going to execute what's in the body statement, which is actually 2 lines of code, this line and this line. So this is a print statement. I think you're familiar with this. And also here we are referencing email sent is the current item. So it could be Alice. That's what we are referencing. Actually, when we say customer list, we are referencing, and email sent, we are actually referencing. Email sent is the index of the position of the list. So 0. So initially we'll start with 0. Yes, it's less than 5. So email, so this will be 0. And then customer list square brackets 0 will retrieve the first element, and it will print sending promotional email to Alice. Then after that, the next thing that we're going to do here in this other line, it might seem confusing, but this is just a way of writing this expression. Email sent is equals to email sent plus 1. So what you're seeing here, by the way, comments, what you're seeing in green is comments. I had forgotten to explain what comments are. These are just explanatory notes that we write that do not get executed. They just explain code. And this is a comment that I have written. So email sent is this expression. You see what I've highlighted? It's equal to just what I have written here. So instead of writing this, which programming people can write, they just decide to write this, just shorten it and write it efficiently. So yeah, so it's the same as that. So that's what we are executing in this line. So we want to add 1 to the value, the current value of email sent. Then we go to the second values. The second, now we have email sent as 2. Then we go to 2. 2, is it less than 5? Then we do the same thing. We select Bob because now here it's going to be, initially it's going to be 1. So that's what we're going to get, 1. It's initially email sent is 0. Then in our first iteration, in our second iteration, it's 1. In our third iteration, it's 2. And etc. So we're going to print out all of that. So let me just remove that so that we are also good to go. Run that. You should be able to see now what's going to happen here. So this will stop iterating through once this expression is false. All right. To finish off now talking about loops, there are 2 concepts in relation to loops that we need to also understand. So sometimes you might want to, in a list, let's say assuming we're using a for loop, we might want to stop at email. and not continue looping through the rest of the items. If the items is many, maybe we want to just only get maybe 5 items or 6 items. And to be able to do that, we normally would have to define our code, our body statement, to have that code that tells us to stop. And to be able to stop, say, we can stop either in a while loop or a for loop. But here we're just going to learn how we work with our for loop. So this is just marketing strategies, assuming that we're going to just we haven't printed out those marketing strategies, but we're going to print them out here. So here we loop through marketing strategies list, and we say if strategy is equals to, by the way, operators, when you're using an if statement, it could be equal to, and this is like equal to, you don't put one equal sign, that's assignment, like creating a variable, equal to, but you can also have less than, then less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, you can have less than or greater than or less than or not equal to, those are just different expressions. But now we just want if strategy is equal to SEO. So if it's true, which it will be true in this particular case when we are doing our third iteration, it will say we will focus on SEO for better search engine visibility, and then we break. Break will now mean like stop looping at all, like get out of the loop, and now print out the next piece of code that we've written after the for loop. So, but if you want it will stop at social media, email campaign, and SEO. So this is what we'll, actually we will print out, yes, those 3. Actually, those 2, considering social media, considering email campaign, then we will focus on that. And we are breaking out completely, then printing out implementing chosen strategy. When we put a /, we just mean next line. So if I remove this, you'll see that implementing strategy will come to this line. And sometimes you might want to have some space. So I'll just put a new line. It's called a new line character. You put a / and an N. You can even put multiple / and stroke N if you want, but just one is okay. But sometimes we don't want to loop completely. Sometimes you just want to not to break out completely when we are iterating. We might want to stop the current iteration, so we don't print it, execute the code that comes after, let's say our break, and go to the next iteration. So that's where we use what is called a continuous keyword. So a continue statement, or call it just a statement. A continue statement does break, just tells Python to just break completely, like don't iterate completely through the loop. But a continue statement would tell us to stop the current iteration, don't even print out anything else within the loop, and continue to the next iteration. So you might have more code over here, another if, another print, another whatever, another mathematical operation. But it means if we have a continue statement, it means we stop here, we skip the rest of the code, then we move on to the next one. So that's usually in specific cases. So that's actually what we are doing here. So if strategy is influencer marketing, we will skip to the next one. You will see that we are not going to say implementing influencer marketing because this code comes after continue. We are going to the next one. We're actually going to print everything aside from influencer marketing. You can see we don't have influencer marketing. All right, at this particular time, you can pause the video, go through the challenge, and then you can continue. So we're going to work on our last set of concepts. So we are going to go through now functions. Functions are just a way of just organizing code that we have written. And we would want to recall that code and perform specific tasks. Sometimes, yes, we have been working with built-in functions like print statements. We've also worked with other functions that allow us to be able to perform specific tasks, like the len function that I had shown. This is a function. We also worked with int, I think it was int function, and quite a large number of them. So we won't, sometimes we might have our own piece of code that we want to reuse. So we can also create a custom function that allows us to use that piece of code, reuse that piece of code. And that function A function usually would be, again, a block of code that we can reuse. We normally give a name to a function and we call that name whenever we need to execute that piece of code. A function also takes in inputs. Sometimes it can take inputs, or it can, and then it gives us outputs, but sometimes it may not take inputs or outputs, but that is something to understand. So for example, in our case here, we might want to create a function. We give it a name. We use a def keyword to create a function. Then we give it a name, send email. Then to define the inputs, we have parentheses, like the way we did with the print function. We had, and others, we had parentheses. We had the parentheses. Inside the parentheses, we define what we want to give as input. We want to give the recipient and comma, then message, 2 things. And then inside the function, we do something with the input, and voila, that's just what we need to do. But a function can return like a value. We can define other things in here and then be able to return. We'll learn that in the next section. So once we have done this, we are going to be calling this function. To use it, we can define it, but now we need to use it. To use it, we just need to say the name of the function. Then we give it the 2 inputs. The first, imp value is that we want to give it. It's this first recipient is this string, comma. Then the second one is this. If you put more, you'll get an error because we haven't defined that as the input. What we have defined here as input is what we call parameters. So the recipient and message are just definitions of the input. We call them parameters. So this function has 2 parameters, recipient and message. What in this case where we are calling this function, like the way we call print function and other functions, what we have here, these values, we call them arguments. So these specific values for the parameters are what we call arguments. So there are arguments and also there are parameters. Run that. You can play around with that. Once you're done with this, you can work on the challenge and then you can continue. So sometimes a function can return something. Here we're just printing out something, but we want, let's say, a function to return something. Let's say a value after its calculation. We create, let's say, calculate return of investment function. It takes in 2 inputs, and then does this operation, and it returns a return of the investment. That's what we want. We define this function to return ROI once we have given it revenue and cost. So to use it, we can give it 2 arguments. We decided to write just 2 variables and call the function, then give those 2 variables, and then the outcome of that variable will be stored in result and print it out. So if we run this, we should be able to see now our value that has been, taken care of. All right, work on the challenge, pause on the video, then you can continue afterwards. Sometimes you might also want to define maybe a parameter in a function and also have a default value for the parameter, so that yes, we are taking 2 values, but there could be another value that we would want to take, but we're giving it a default value. We can also be able to use it inside the function, as you can see here. So they're called default arguments. There's this concept that will come in handy, but I won't go so much into it, but they're what are called global variables. So variables that you store outside functions that you have defined are usually called global variables, and you can access them from the function, any function. But variables that you store inside a function, you cannot access them outside the function. So you can only access the variable that you have created. That you can only access a global variable. All right. Sometimes we might also want to shorten our way of writing functions. We might decide to create a function called calculate total costs. That's where lambda functions come in. So our function name can be called calculate total cost, and we say equals to. Lambda is just the keyword to explain that we are giving this, but this is a keyword. This is a function, a short function. They're called anonymous functions. And then we give the input and whatever we want to go in the body, and we are able to use this function just like the way we would. You can go through the text. I think that's almost it. I think this is just another way of, I think I'll just leave the last concept to you. You can go through that. Just go through the notes and also work on the challenges once you're done. I hope you're able to learn a lot in this course. It's quite comprehensive. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat, and hopefully we're able to see you in other future videos that we're going to be posting in relation to marketing. All the best.